or that as men in the workplace, in the family, that we don't have to work for the respect or the desire of others to follow our lead. God does allow for men in the church and in the home, the husbands and the pastor of the church. God does allow for the men to lead, but God also has a lot of requirements for these men to be the kind of leaders that others want to follow. So as a man, it's not enough to ask yourself, are you in charge? But you must ask yourself, do people enjoy the fact that you're leading? Do they find joy? Do they find peace? Do they find comfort? Are you someone that they trust? And so as we look through these qualities of a biblical leader, hopefully you can begin to evaluate your ability, your strengths, and your weaknesses, and strengthen the weaknesses and be appreciative for the strengths. Tonight, Pastor Ethan Amasula, our youth pastor, will be joining me again, and we'll be starting off with two more tonight, Pastor Ethan. We'll be looking at the biblical quality of delegation along with the quality of experience. Now, both of these are, all of them are good. We're looking at 15 biblical qualities, and I don't know that you could really take one of them out and say that one's not needed, otherwise we would not include it, but these especially. See, the quality of delegation not only allows the leader to continue going strong, but it allows the leader to essentially partner with other leaders and become a leader of leaders. Now, before we get into delegation, and the scripture that we have, Ethan, is actually in Exodus chapter 18, I feel like the reason a lot of leaders don't delegate, there's more than one. One reason men don't delegate, husbands don't delegate to their wives, or men in the church, in the secular workplace, don't delegate to other men or women. One, they're afraid of competition. So the husbands are afraid that their wives, if they delegate something, the wives will actually be so successful that the husband will be obsolete, no longer needed in that particular area. So they're basically afraid that someone might succeed. Mm-hmm. So this fear of someone else taking their place, this fear of they might be better at it than me, or the pride that no one can do better than me. So the first one is fear. You're afraid to delegate because you're afraid if you do, you'll be obsolete. The second one is pride, meaning you're not afraid that they'll do better. You think no one can do better. So why would you delegate? Because you're the best one for the job. So pride keeps you from partnering with and overseeing the success of others. I feel like a third reason is just because some people don't know how to lead leaders. You see, to lead a bunch of followers is pretty much the lowest level of leadership you can attain, right? Yeah. A bunch of people, men, women, children, teens, adults, doesn't matter, who want to follow. It is easy for them to follow. Almost anyone who's loud, outgoing, type A personality can lead that group, right? Because they're just looking for someone to follow. It's like as long as you are going in a direction, they'll follow you whether you're successful or not. That's the easiest type of people to lead. Mm-hmm. And a lot of leaders never graduate from that low tier of leadership to the next tier, which is now you're leading leaders. Basically, people who are leading others, you're now leading them. And by the way, to lead a leader, leaders have higher expectations, right? Someone who's a natural follower, again, as long as you're outgoing, you're funny, semi-trustworthy, right? As long as you're just going somewhere, they'll follow you. Right. Leaders, they're going to question your leadership. They're going to say, are you taking me in the right direction? Is this successful for me or my family? They're going to question your choices, question your direction. A good leader will, by the way. Right. And so a lot of leaders don't want to delegate because by doing so, they're creating leaders and they don't know how to lead leaders. All right, the third tier of leadership. So the first tier is just leading followers. Mm-hmm. The second tier is leading leaders. The third tier is leading leaders of leaders. Mm-hmm. So that second tier is you're leading men or women who lead followers. The third tier is you're leading leaders who are overseeing and leading other leaders who our group is overseeing and leading followers. And that requires even a higher tier because now you're leading a unique type of leader who themselves are leaders of leaders. Right. And so they are very choosy on who they're willing to follow. That requires a lot of your character, requires a lot of your responsibility, and not many men or women rise to that level of expectation.
It definitely takes a very high level and awareness of humility because you can't be a leader who's confident in your leadership and at the same time be conscious about, wait, am I the most powerful person in the room?
Right.
Because if you're trying to, it's easy to get away with that if you're just leading followers. It's hard to get away with it if you're working on leading other leaders. It's literally impossible if you're trying to be a multiplying leader. You cannot be a multiplying leader and not be humble.
And be afraid of what they might accomplish.
Right, and be afraid of other people's success.
Yes.
Yeah.
Humility is a big part of leadership. That was number 3. We've dealt with that. And that is why we're kind of putting them in a certain order, not necessarily the order that the Bible would put them, but in my head, the order that let's address the humility, let's address the servant's heart before we get to the point of leading leaders. Because when you delegate, you are creating a team of leaders, and now you've got to lead those leaders. So what do you think, Ethan? You're young 20s, mid-20s, 25 now, right? What do you think for your age group is the biggest hindrance of delegation? Is it the fear? I'm afraid that if I delegate, they'll be better than me. Is it the number 2, pride? No one else can do it as good as me. Or is it number 3, I just don't have the skill set to lead leaders, therefore I'm not going to delegate?
I don't think it's fear. I think fear, obviously all 3 are big causes. As far as my generation, I don't see fear being a big issue because at least with, the youngest version of millennials and the oldest version of Generation Z, if you want to categorize people, they're very much so about other people's successes. I would say it's not the third one that you mentioned because YouTube's out there and people know they can educate themselves to a certain point. I think a lot of it is the pride because it's that, hey, I'm going to be the best version of me. And I'm going to do it so well that there can be nobody else other than me. Well, that's true. Because I do believe personally that, for example, worship, God created everyone individually such that I can only worship God the way that I can. You can't, no one can worship God the same 2 ways. But at the same time, true leadership is creating vacuums that I've trained somebody, and that's discipleship. I've brought someone to a point where they not only can do what I do, but now with their unique calling, unique giftings, they can maybe do it better than me.
Do it better. I think that the best style of leadership is to essentially lead yourself out of a job.
Yes.
Where basically you are creating leaders, if necessary, they could do your job. Not that they will, but they could. And by the way, if God so chooses and they don't do it here, maybe they can do your job somewhere else. And now you truly are multiplying.
Yeah.
A lot of leaders, and you said multiplying, a lot of leaders just want to add. I've got 50 followers. I've added to my followers, now 60. I've added to my followers, now 100. And I got 500 followers. We're actually, a real leader is saying, how many leaders am I training? How many leaders of other leaders? I mean, that's the top tier in my head.
Yeah.
You're not training leaders of followers. You're training leaders of leaders.
That just kind of, for me, affirms more of the pride situation because when you look at our culture today, it is very much so like, at least the younger generation, people in my age group, a lot of it is, Instagram. It's the social media culture where they are counting the number of followers, becoming an social media influencer,
right?
Is like a recent
but they're only
phenomenon.
Influencing followers,
right?
And if even real ones at that.
Exactly, and it's all about like building my brand,
which is
but is
that true biblical leadership? Building your brand?
No, it's all about the kingdom.
When we delegate, we're not building our brand.
Right.
What we are doing is building God's kingdom.
Right.
And so you are delegating to other leaders to lift them up, to empower them, to equip them so that they too can accomplish great things for God.
If you're not equipping, you're not leading.
And by the way, that's a great thing. But delegation is not enough. Just giving someone a job. If you're married, giving your wife a task and saying, all right, honey, can you do this? But then giving her no tools with which to accomplish it, right? Oversee the budget. How much money do I have? I'm not going to tell you. You have no access to the bank account. Like, what kind of success is she going to see to oversee the budget if she can't actually deal with the money, right? And we're kind of, we're severing our leaders. And by the way, I think that a lot of leaders, whether subconsciously, Ethan, or out of pride, I think they're almost setting up other leaders to fail. Because if it goes back to the first one, they're afraid of seeing them succeed. So they want to look like a great leader. So they want to say, hey, I've delegated. But really, they haven't delegated you to success because they haven't given you the tools to succeed. They are almost locking in. They are ensuring your failure. By the way, when another person fails, what does that do for the leader? If someone's not smart enough to see it, others will say, wow, that leader's just, he really or she really is the only one that can do this. So for those who are not smart enough to see it, when a leader delegates someone to failure, their failure makes the leader look better. Because other people say, wow, we sure are glad we have Pastor Ethan because no one else seems to be able to do what he's doing. Well, it's only because Pastor Ethan, Pastor Russ, whatever, they can't do it only because we don't equip them to succeed. We doom them to failure so that we look better.
Right. I was going to say, anybody with half a brain should be looking at that and saying, look, obviously, yes, the person failed. That's kind of on them, but it's on the leader who said, you're going to do this. And if you don't give someone the tools to succeed, it's like being a coach. If all you do was let your kids pick daisies during practice, and you go to a game and they lose, it doesn't matter how much you scream and shout at them, people are going to look at you and be like, no, you're a bad coach, sir.
If they're wise enough to see that. Unfortunately,
Yes.
there's a lot of fools today that don't actually see through that poor style of leadership.
Right.
And they say, but our pastor is delegating, and he's got other men and women doing these things, but just no one can do it like our pastor. Yeah, because the guy doesn't train anyone, right?
No, right.
If it's in the workplace, wow, we sure are lucky to have our boss because no one else can do that job. Yeah, because there's no training going on. So we need to make sure that as leaders, not only do we delegate, but we equip those we delegate to success.
Right.
And how does that look? Well, it includes training. It includes verbal training. It includes one-on-one training. It includes having them follow you around or someone else who can show them how it looks. It also includes, by the way, checking in on them regularly afterwards, depending on the need. Not just a one-time, here you go, here's a handbook, here's a manual, do what it says, and you'll be okay. Mm-hmm. Delegation truly is an art. And it is, first and foremost, delegating to the right person. Because the Bible tells us in the book of Proverbs, when you trust or delegate to the wrong person, we talked about this the other day, it's like a broken tooth, right? It's severely painful to delegate to the wrong person. But even delegating to the right person and not giving them the right tools, you're still going to end up with the broken tooth scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look now in Scripture, Exodus and chapter 18. This is a well-known passage. Beginning in verse 9, we find that Moses has brought the Israelite nation of Israel out of Egypt. I mean, hundreds of thousands of these guys, and there's a lot of them. And Jethro, the father-in-law to Moses, meets Moses at camp, and he says, hey, Moses, glad to see you. Moses says, Dad, good to see you. Hey, I'm pretty busy today. Can you just hang out with me while I do my thing? And so Jethro follows Moses, and Moses sits down, and there's a long line. I mean, it must have been easily hundreds, if not thousands long, right? And Moses, his goal was to knock out as many conversations as possible, whether it's on a judgment or whether it's just to give advice or encouragement or the word of the Lord. So he's supposed to judge all of these thousands of people and spends almost every day dealing with what are minor issues because he's the only one. And Jethro calls him out on it. And verse 14 of chapter 18, Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people. He said, what is the thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. What do you think was the issue with Moses? The first, second, or third issue?
I think it was the third issue.
Which is what?
He just didn't know
how to lead
delegate.
leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, keep in mind, he grew up in Egypt as a prince for 40 years. I'm not so sure that it was the third. I could be wrong, but I mean, he was a prince for 40 years and in the wilderness for 40 years, before he came back. I think it was the second. I think it was pride.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about all his other interactions that he has with God. He definitely has pride.
Look, the Bible tells us Moses was a meek man. I'm not denying his meekness. The Bible says he was a meek man. But it doesn't mean even a meek man can't have moments of pride and deception. And I think that Moses here, the pocket of pride that he had here deceived him into thinking, I'm the only one that can do this.
Okay, makes sense.
It doesn't mean that he was prideful in all areas of life because we find Moses' interaction with the Israelites. The guy was extremely patient.
Yes.
But this particular pocket of pride seems to display itself here where Moses says, well, they're coming to me. I'm the one that's going to give them the answer.
Yep.
Now, Jethro calls him out on it. And he says in verse number 17, the thing that thou doest is not good. Moses, you're a fool. This is not good for you. It's not good for them. So he gives them instruction. You can read the verses following up to 24, he basically says you need to get some other leaders and set them up over other leaders who then, train the people. So basically, Jethro is saying, Moses, you are the first level tier leader. You're not delegating at all. You're just leading followers. Moses, you need to jump completely past the second tier all the way to the third tier, not just training leaders, but training leaders of leaders who those then take care of the followers.
Right.
He says you should only be dealing with the most severe issues where the leaders or the leaders of leaders cannot make a judgment call. Then you step in. Otherwise, train your leaders who will train their leaders who will deal with the people under them. Third level of leadership.
I'm looking at, Jethro's wisdom here in verses, it's verse 20, 21, 22 to the end. It's a lot. Like he says, he gives you first of all, they have to meet this requirement. There's a list of requirements. It's a short list, but it's a list of requirements. And then you're going to have not only your list of requirements they have to follow, but then Moses has to do the job figuring out, okay, you have to have rulers of thousands, hundreds, 50s, 10s, and you have to teach them ordinances and laws.
So the leaders of the leaders of the leaders of the leaders. Again, we're talking third tier leadership.
And so not only, that brings my mind to another thing is that not only does it require a lot of humility, but it takes a lot of, I think we mentioned it this morning in church, and the word endurance, patience.
Yes.
It takes a lot of patience because if you're going to train people who are going to be leaders of leaders, there has to be they're not going to be at point B right away. In fact, it's probably the training process to become a great delegator is watch people go from point A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. And then when they hit there, okay, now they're ready. But it is a process. So not only does it take humility to see that you need leadership, you need to lead at that level, but it also takes a lot of endurance to say, I have to be okay with it not looking like how it should look like.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about parenting.
Oh, man, yeah, that's good.
When it comes to delegation,
yeah,
most parents delegate to their kids for one reason: they don't want to do the job themselves. That's bad parenting.
Yeah.
You don't delegate to your slave labor, your child slave labor right here, because you don't want to do the job yourself. You delegate to your children to teach them to be what? Leaders. Yeah. See, a good dad is not a leader of followers. A good dad is one who trains leaders. Now, having said that, I've got 5 kids. I can tell you right now, not all 5 of mine will be strong leaders. I've got at least 1, possibly 2. I'm not sure yet with the second. At least 1, my boy Drake. I don't know yet with him. My other 4, I pretty got him pegged. One of my girls, I just know she's not going to be a leader of leaders. I know that, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. So my job as a dad then is to train my daughter, who's not going to be a leader of leaders, at least not as I see it yet. I want to train her then to know the right kind of leaders to follow. Mm-hmm. Because if she's going to be a follower, she needs to find success by following the right kind of leaders. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I'm pretty confident. I have 3 other girls. Those are my leaders.
Yeah, they're pretty
so
strong
my goal, yes, you see it too, right?
Yes.
My goal then is to train my daughters not just to be good workers, but to train them to be leaders of leaders. That starts, dads, with delegation. If you do everything for your kids, all you've got is followers. When you start giving them tasks, you are now creating leaders. And at a low level, by the way, a child, you're training them to be a leader really of themselves because you're not really giving them other workers under them unless you got a lot of kids and they're over other kids. But for most families, you're just training them to be leaders in the sense of taking a task and doing it for the sake of, I want to be a leader, not because dad doesn't want to do the job. Yep. Then, as they get older, hopefully there would be opportunities that you would take for your family where you said, all right, you've learned how to take a task. I've delegated it. You do well with it. Now, let me give you your younger sibling. Now, let me pair you with someone else. Let's see how you do with that individual. By the time they're 18 or 20, dads, your kids should have already experienced what it looks like to lead other people successfully. If all you've done is train them to follow by 18, that's probably all they're going to do until enough destruction comes in their life where they eventually say, I'm done with this and want to figure out on their own how to lead. You should have taught them that. Do you have a plan? Are you proactive in training your kids to be leaders of leaders? It starts with delegation at home. Not to make your life easier, because delegation It can make your life easier once you've equipped them to success. Ethan, you nailed it. The first part of leading leaders and delegation actually takes a lot of work. And so a lot of dads either delegate because they don't want to do the work themselves, or they delegate, it's too much work, and then they stop delegating, and the kid never really learns the art of leadership either way.
Yeah, because it takes purpose. You have to do it on purpose. I was just thinking of what you're saying now, and with the teenagers that I work with, and some of the watching them and wanting them to become leaders. Something that unfortunately I had to learn it's the hard way a little bit, but a lot of it starts off with delegating tasks, and then from there, at some point, you do need to give them responsibilities.
Yes.
Which responsibility is not just, task is one thing. Responsibility means that now they have to take ownership over a certain aspect. Or even if that's like, hey, now you're in charge of not just taking care of the kitchen trash, you're in charge of making sure that house is, whatever. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just a small thing, because tasks and responsibilities, they build themselves. If it's done right, if you lead a child or a teenager right in that area, it builds their level of competency and just being able to lead themselves, which is huge for leaders.
One more thing about delegation, whether it's in the workplace, secular, whether it's in the church with your family, the art of delegation, when done well, and it does take time. It's a journey. It's not an overnight, I've delegated 3 to 3 people, my life is easier. It doesn't work that way. But the art of delegation, what it does for you as a leader is when you invest in 3 people who then take that investment and pass it on to 10 each, so now you got 33 people, who those 10 then invest in others, rather than the effort of investing in over 100, 200, 300 people, which just you can't do in your own human condition. Right. You are investing in leaders who will take that investment and pass it forward to a group of others. Mm-hmm. That is the true beauty of delegation. It is multiplication rather than addition. All right, let's move on to the second quality for tonight, biblical quality of a leader. That's found in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6. Now we're going to that passage of Scripture, of course, dealing directly with spiritual leaders, pastors within the church, but I think that this quality is just such a great one that whether it's a pastor or not, it is something to consider. Mm-hmm. Definitely, the Bible actually makes it a requirement for a pastor. I would say it would be a wise consideration for almost any level of leadership, and that is experience. So in verse 6, the Bible says that a pastor should not be a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Now, having said that, there's various levels of experience depending on the level of leadership that is required of them, right? If you're asking them to lead just basically themselves to get a job done, not much of experience is needed for that. But once you start giving them others to lead, some experience is required. Once you give them others and a large budget, you got to have more experience. Once you give them the responsibility of leadership that doesn't just affect a budget but could make or break someone's life, which is a pastor, can do a lot of damage to the lives of family when it's not done in a godly way. God says, I'm not going to mess around with the spiritual condition of my people. So make sure when you choose, by the way, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 6, God's not dropping leaders in their lap. The responsibility is on the church leadership. And if there is no church leadership, if there are no pastors, if there are no trustees or deacons, then it's the people. Now, in this particular church, they were blessed with Timothy as a pastor. So Timothy's leadership along with the church, God's saying when you are bringing other leaders in, make sure they have experience, because their lack of experience can do a lot of damage to the people of God. Why? Specifically, if you don't have experience, all you've got is knowledge, and knowledge puffs up when it's not combined with wisdom, especially the wisdom that comes through experience.
Which is why he gives that caveat at the end, the condemnation of the devil. I think I know when I first heard someone interpret this passage correctly, I was like, I don't like that, because I want to be a pastor. I want to lead people. Yeah. But obviously God said this for a reason, and that's more than okay. What young leaders, growing leaders like myself need to understand is that that's why we have things like counsel. That's why we have things such as that's why mentorship, well, I guess discipleship, a modern word for that, for definitely people looking to be leaders, mentorship is a really good way to look at it too, is that, I don't have 10 years of experience under my belt. I don't have 15. I don't have 20. I don't have 30. And, the guys who've been there, they've made mistakes, and they can definitely guide me away from the ones that I either have, am, or are about to make. So,
and that's well said, Ethan. See, as a leader, I'm not. By the way, this morning I mentioned in Sunday morning service we were bringing on a candidate, and I said he's an older guy, and I said like late 30s, and some of you started laughing. You're like, late 30s? That's not older, right?
I'm dying up there.
I'm thinking reference to I've got Pastor Ethan 25, Pastor Jordan 24, 25. So I'm thinking reference to my current pastoral staff, but obviously in the congregation we got a lot much older and wiser than late 30s. But here is the beauty of age. When you take advantage of the experiences, you can grow significantly in your wisdom. And Ethan, I think, I've said this before to you. I think I'm pretty sure I've said it to Jordan, is my goal as a pastor, as a leader who's been in the ministry for longer, much longer than you, is that you don't need to repeat the mistakes that I've already made. It's not necessary for you to do so. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some mistakes I made out of pride when I was younger. A lot of the mistakes I made were honest ones. I didn't have someone to say, no, don't do that. Some of my leaders in my life were pretty much of the mindset, I've given you a task, do what you want, do or die, hope everything goes well for you, right? Mm-hmm. And so I made mistakes, honest ones, and I don't want to be that kind of leader to you or to Jordan. I want to guide you guys towards success without having to suffer through the pain of mistakes that I've already encountered.
Yeah. That's been a very healthy, one of the healthy markers for me in determining, how am I doing with pride and how am I doing with leadership, is if I'm listening to the people who I know have more wisdom than me. Because if I know they have more wisdom than me and I'm not listening, or if I'm not willing to take that advice, the chances are I'm allowing my pride to kick in.
Well, there's some wisdom right there, Ethan. Good job. Though, as parents, again, let's get back to the family. This idea of free-range parenting, I don't know that it's common in necessarily Meriden Hills. I'm not aware of that. I don't know enough of our families to know if any are free-range parenting. That's a scary thing, though, because free-range parenting is essentially you're on your own. You got to relearn all the mistakes I learned. I'm not going to protect you from those. And that philosophy, that idea is the best way to learn is firsthand experience. Now, I get that. I really do. I understand the idea that a child will learn a lesson stronger if they make the mistake themselves, but there are some mistakes that aren't worth the lesson you learn through the mistake, right? Yeah. A young girl getting pregnant at 16, for sure she's going to learn a lesson, but truly as a dad, would you say that lesson, the lesson she learned was worth the mistakes and the suffering and the pain she's going to have really the rest of her life of being a young mom, right? I'm not saying having a child is ever a horrible thing, but to start at that age, that's going to follow her. And so dads, yes, there are mistakes we've got to let our kids make. I'm not denying that. There are things our kids have to experience firsthand. But you have to have the wisdom to determine what mistakes aren't worth the lesson. And how can my child learn this lesson without going through the mistake? Can they learn it from a conversation? Can they learn it from watching others? Mm-hmm. Can they learn it through another, mistake not as severe as this mistake, right? But this idea of my kids need to learn it from themselves, that's not biblical.
No.
We need to make sure that we are training our kids in the way they should go, not just letting them figure out life on their own.
I was going to say that, experience, the price of experience, at some point, someone gets hurt with any kind of experience. And it doesn't have to be like you're hurt. It doesn't have to be that way. Optimally, the best kind of wisdom that you can get, the best kind of experience is just listening to what God has put in front of your face. Amen. And just like, okay, I'm listening. The pain is Jesus paid the price for my sin. That's the pain of the experience. So now I get to listen to the wisdom that God's truth has to offer for me. And then the second best is just taking it secondhand. You don't have to, and that's the thing that. Because we do have, not in our church, not our church community, but I have heard parents before say stuff like, well, they have to learn the hard way. And it's almost like knocking their pride down a couple of notches is a hard way to learn too. It hurts a lot. It's going to hurt them a lot less emotionally and spiritually if you do it that way. But yeah, you're right. It's tough to see people make those decisions and allow their children to suffer, and it really is lazy parenting if you look at it that way.
So when it comes to us as Christians being leaders, let's not take positions of leadership we are not yet prepared to take. We are a novice. Mm-hmm. If we haven't gone through the task, and I'm not saying making all the mistakes ourselves, but in some way gained experience through the mistakes of others, through the Word of God, through the Holy Spirit, gained experience so we're not making those mistakes that now hurt others. Also, for those of us who are following other leaders, please be wise enough to have your eyes opened to, will this leader self-destruct in my presence? And will that self-destruction affect me and my family? If the answer is yes, what are you doing? Why are you following this man or woman in the church or outside of the church who doesn't have the experience to get them through the difficult times? Over the last year of pandemic, a lot of churches have shut down, and I'm not sure they're coming back. No. For various reasons. But you know what a lot of the reasons are? There's a lot of young guys, middle-aged guys who lacked experience, didn't know how to handle the tribulation of a pandemic, and they made just bad choices after bad choices, and they've hurt a lot of people. There's a lot of Christians. And I'm talking on both sides of the coin, whether the side of the coin where the leader was adamant that we will not open, and if we do, all of these things have to be followed to the offense of the congregation, or the other side of we're staying open, bless God no matter what, and all these, whatever side of the coin they're on. As a leader, they weren't effective in leading the people through the pandemic, regardless of which extreme they might have gone, and their lack of experience hurt people, hurt God's kingdom, hurt themselves, but really, ultimately, we will not know how much damage was done by inexperienced leaders this last year. So, men, here's my thoughts. The world is not getting better, and the possibility of tribulations, of dark times, the possibility of chaos is going to get, I think, intensified. As we get closer to Revelation and the rapture and the tribulation period, I don't think we're going to have a paradise moment between that here and then. I think that things will get harder. It is more important now than ever, at least in the American culture, because third world countries, other countries have already experienced the need for strong leadership. Mm-hmm. But we as American citizens are just now recognizing how important it is for an experienced, strong leader to be, leading the way. From in front, from behind, amongst, whatever that style is, mm-hmm. because the inexperienced, when confronted with tribulation, misstep, hesitate, self-destruct, run away, and people are hurt. It includes our families, it includes jobs, it includes God's church. Experience. Because pride lifts up, and God tells us that when you lift up yourself in pride, He brings you down. Yep. And I am confident of this truth. That if you're going down, whoever's following you is going with you. Yeah. And the larger role of leadership you hold, the more damage you can do to those who follow.
Yeah, I'm nothing to add to that. I agree.
So, we're looking at two biblical qualities tonight, delegation and experience. Don't delegate so that you have less. Delegate so that everyone can have more. Mm-hmm. When a leader delegates to other leaders, everyone benefits. People get more. And also, experience. Make sure that you are not rising to a level of leadership that is above your experience. The Bible warns of that. Don't let a novice take this level of pastoral leadership, right? And take the journey, take the steps, and take someone with you so that when you are older, you're not alone at that level of leadership. You brought someone with you. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to delegation.
Yeah. They go right in hand. Delegation and experience. I like that.
All right, so we are going to complete our conversation tonight for our online guests. We're glad that you joined us. We'll see you again next Sunday night as we continue this series. We'll be looking at biblical leadership when it comes to love and a good example, you might say, our testimony as leaders. So hope to see you next Sunday night at 6 o'clock for our Forged Men's Group.